Hi, welcome to the next screencast. This is on the dark side of the family, so we're going to look at domestic violence and abuse in the household. So we are going to define what domestic violence is, look at who the victims are and why, any official crime statistics, and as ever we're going to analyse those a little bit and offer some sociological explanation about these trends, the changes and the impact on society and the individuals. So, what is domestic violence? There's a quote there that came from the Women's Aid Federation. But we're looking at the physical, psychological, sexual, or violence, financial violence, okay? And that's not something that's necessarily picked up on much, is the financial violence. And we're going to look a little bit about that today and also in the lesson next week. So, there's your definition. Read through at your leisure. So in terms of statistics and looking at domestic violence, okay, it accounts for almost a sixth of all violent crimes. 6.6 million domestic assaults every year. That's not 6.6 million people. That could be more than one assault. And about half of those actually involve physical injury. So studies carried out by Merleys, Black, etc. will look at these kind of statistics and offer some kind of evidence as to the types of trends and statistics that are happening out there. So Merleys Black in 1999 carried out a study and looked at that most victims of domestic violence is not surprisingly women. 99% of all these incidents were by men on women. So it's a very small percent, obviously. 1% are women on women violence. Majority of it is committed by men on women. Nearly 1 in 4 women have been assaulted by a partner at some point in their lifetime. That then increases to 1 in 8 on a regular basis. Looking at the Merleys Black study here, we can see that it's quite gender biased. So it is very much against women and very much by men. Dobash and Dobash, in 1979, they did a study in Scotland, and they actually interviewed women in a women's refuge, and they looked at and found that these incidents were normally set off by the husband, and a lot of these were because of a challenge to their authority. So we're thinking about masculinity, patriarchal rule, and a man's role within the household as being very much threatened. Now, got to bear in mind that this is 1979, so please take that into context and when you're thinking about analysing it and using it as an evaluation tool, think about what the family was like in the late 70s and early 1980s. Was it as equal as it is now? Some suggest obviously it's not. They argue that the marriage kind of legitimizes violence against women, so thinking again about this patriarchal rule. And also thinking about divorce laws a bit. We covered divorce laws last week. It took until 1969 or 1971 for it to be implemented, the Divorce Reform Act, but that was for like wider ideas. Before that, obviously, women were very restricted in terms of what they could divorce men for. Up until the late 19th century, early 20th century, women could really struggled and very rarely filed for divorce. And after that, it had to be very specific. So it had to be violence, or it had to be, some major threat. If you think about, though, the type of women who might be in those relationships, maybe they're because they had to be in terms of financial security. So you need to take that into consideration also in terms of the needs of the women who were in that relationship and maybe why they didn't divorce or why they stuck around with a violent partner. So, as we've suggested with Merleys Black, but also with Catherine Coleman, and the very gender specific these kind of violence is more likely to be men with violence towards women, and this could be lots of different types of violence, but women would experience obviously abuse from their partners a lot more than men. So abuse such as family abuse, sexual assault, even stalking. But when you look at these, there's only one of those who's really stranger. So you need to take into consideration how the media view this idea about who's committing these crimes. So look out when you're in a nightclub, look out when you're walking down the alley. But when you think about it, these kind of crimes are actually being committed in the household by people who you actually know. as mentioned, there's obviously always problems with statistics. Dorbash and Dorbash's study, the interviews with women and women's refuge, there could be a bias there because of these women's ill feelings towards men, the surroundings that they're in, who was overhearing these things, thinking about what Dorbash and Dorbash actually wanted them to hear. So there's lots of different things you need to take in consideration when it comes to research. And one of the problems with statistics is that a lot of victims won't actually report it. So if you're in a financial situation where you need financial support by a partner and you don't have that fallback of having your own job or anything, you might feel as though if you report, then you're going to be cast out on the street, you're going to be financially worse off. Also, a lot of women will think about the children and splitting the family up. So there's pressure, there's fear, and also, this idea of love, okay? Now, obviously, if you could see me, you'll know I'll be doing inverted commas when I say that. But yeah, this idea of love being that, you stay with a partner because you love them, and, they didn't mean to do it, or they were drunk, or whatever. So, to kind of back this up a bit, Earnshire found that, women went through a lot of assaults before making a report. It's as though the resilience was broken down somewhat. It's interesting when you think about possible reasons why women wouldn't report these domestic violence cases a lot earlier, and there's a lot of different reasons, and they're very individualistic as well. And it goes without saying, when we look at statistics like that from Earnshire, that domestic violence is probably the most unreported crime likely. Those official crime statistics as well, you need to take into consideration that we live in a patriarchal society. So who are the police, who are the prosecutors, who are the judges, who are the juries? Majority of the time, it's very much going to be a male-orientated patriarchal system, so the justice system. So that leaves a reluctance by the women to actually move forward. Cheel looked at that a little bit even further, because there was a reluctance from police and other agencies to actually get involved in family. If we think about it from a new right point of view and what they're saying, that everyone should kind of look after themselves and families should sort out their own issues, and the police and other state agencies are very conservative, and they think, well, what goes on behind closed doors should be sorted behind closed doors, and we shouldn't get involved. And Cheel suggests that there's 3 reasons for this. Is that the family is a private sphere, so it's very private. What goes on behind closed is, it's up to them, and we shouldn't get involved in it. The family is a good thing. So from a new right perspective and the functionalist perspective, the family is very strong. It needs to stay together for the good of society. And individuals are free agents, and if she wants to leave the man through domestic violence, then she can. Why should the police get involved? You can. The courts are out there where you can apply for divorce and things like that, and you don't necessarily need police involvement to get rid of a husband and leave. Obviously, there's major issues with that, and as you can imagine, feminists aren't too happy with what Cheel's saying. So from a feminist viewpoint, and specifically looking from at the moment from a radical viewpoint, is that Dorbash and Dorbash show that there is evidence that we live in this patriarchy, and Firestone and Millett back this idea up as well, that we live in this patriarchal society. There's a key division in society between men and women, so not only within the household, but as mentioned, in terms of how women are viewed in the household by the media, by the police, by the courts, by all of these male-run organisations. Women are, looked at as a weaker sex. Now, feminists obviously see this as like, men being the enemy yet again. So it's not just the family, but it's also outside the family. There's no refuge from this exploitation, and there's no refuge from this stereotypical view of what a woman's role is. Radical feminists obviously say that family is the main source of this female oppression, and that women are dominated through domestic violence or a threat of it. So it's a further extension of this patriarchal oppression, that women have this threat of domestic violence hanging over them. And like I say, it doesn't have to be physical necessarily, it can be financial. So if a woman doesn't have any money, she can't go out. If a woman has to do all of the housework and cleaning, and she's forced to do it, and she's guilted into doing it, then she's not going to be able to do anything else but that. And this threat of you're going to do something if you feel as though you're going to be physically abused, or you might be worn down, so you just give in and do it. So explanations as to why domestic violence actually happens is as mentioned, it's a way of exerting this dominance in a patriarchal society by men. and that the kind of state institutions reinforce this because they're not getting involved. And explanations for that would be the case is that the police, the judges, etc., are actually men themselves, so they're not really going to side against men, and it's just going to be women whinging. But there's criticisms of it, obviously. Faith Robertson Elliott, she rejects this idea of a patriarchal society with the, looking at it from a viewpoint that not all men commit these violent crimes, this domestic violence or physical abuse. Radical feminists also fail to explain how women themselves are the abusers. So women who abuse their partners themselves or abuse children. There's no actual evidence to suggest that. They focus solely on women being abused. Merle's Black found that, as you can see, 1 in 7 men have been assaulted, and 1 in 20 repeatedly so. So it's not just a female thing. This it is also men as well. And on the back of that, there's this idea that it's not just a female bias. So if you are a child or a young person, you're very likely to be abused in some way. If you're from a lower social class, again, because of stresses and strains and frustrations of finance, that leads to more violence, and it doesn't necessarily have to be geared towards women. It could be the other way around. If you live in rented accommodation, Merle's Black believes that you are more likely to suffer some domestic violence. And drug users and alcohol consumption. If 39% of people who are drug users or are heavy alcohol consumers are on the end of domestic violence. That's mainly because you're hanging around with people who are drug users and alcohol consumers, and that idea about losing control, etc., definitely comes to the fore. That idea links in with Richard Wilkinson about domestic violence, inequality and stress. So it's not necessarily just a female thing. Again, it's about who you are and where you're from. And the stress of family, so jobs, money, housing, the lack of time because of the amount of stuff that you have to do, double jobs, etc., leads to this domestic violence through these stresses. Some families have fewer resources and they have lower income, etc., and the housing that they live in. And Wilkinson does believe that it links in with the likelihood of domestic violence happening. So in kind of evaluation of that, Wilkinson and Merle's Black show that it's not just females who are suffering. All people are equally in danger of it. So it's about if you have low power, you have low status, low income, low wealth, you're at greater risk. Criticism of that, though, is that it doesn't really explain why women rather than men are the main victims of this, because women get as much stress and men get as much stress as each other. So why is it that men are carrying out? So there may be some kind of biological idea, or as a feminist would say, this is a link to patriarchal society. Thank you very much for listening to this. Make sure you bring your notes along to the lesson. I will be checking, and I'll see you all next week. Bye bye.